Hello, this video is for lesson 1.5 from the textbook. It is titled Adding Integers, where our objective is to subtract integers. So our vocabulary is additive inverse. We'll get to that later on whenever we see it highlighted here in the text. So we're going to start off with this scuba diver example. So a scuba diver studying marine life is 4 feet below sea level. From that depth, the diver descends 72 feet to the ocean floor and then rises 61 feet. So they're at 4 feet below the sea level. They dive down 72 feet. Then they come back up 61 feet. The diver rests there to avoid decompression illness. Where is the diver relative to sea level? In example 3, you'll see how to answer this question by adding integers. One way to add integers is to use a number line. So number lines come in real handy whenever we're trying to understand the concept of adding and subtracting integers. I just noticed in the title here that says adding integers, but the objective is to subtract integers. And so that's got me a little bit confused, but we'll roll with it. That's fine. To add a positive integer, we move to the right. So if we're at -3, and we were adding a positive integer, we would move to the right if we're adding positive integers. And if we're adding a negative integer, then we would move to the left. So if we're at +3 and we were adding a negative integer, we would be going back to the left. So adding a negative integer is like subtracting a positive, and we'll look at that whole concept. You've seen me change the sign of you see me change the subtraction sign to an addition sign and then change the sign of the number following it. And that's kind of what's going on here, leading up to this concept here. All right, so looking at the next page, example 1, adding integers using a number line. So here we have use a number line to find the sum. So you start at 3 and we're going to add a negative number. So we're going to go back to the left. So we start at 3. We're adding a negative number, so we're going back to the left. We're taking away. It's kind of like subtracting a positive, right? We could actually change, if you look at this, and we could actually say 3 minus 9. It would be the same thing. You're changing the sign to subtraction, and then you're taking the opposite of the number that comes after the sign that you changed. So we'll go ahead and look at that there and get my highlighter back. Here we go. So we start at 3 and add a negative number means to go back. And so if we go back 9 spaces, well, the first 3 get us to 0. That leaves another 6 left over, and we would end at -6. So the answer to this is 3 plus -9 equals -6. And we see that here in the answer section, right? On the next one, we start at -5. So we start here at -5. And then we're adding 3 to it, so we're going to move to the right 1, 2, 3 spaces, and we end at -2. So we see that -5 plus 3 equals -2. Now in the study strategy over here, it says in the activity on page 28, I believe that was an earlier activity, you use 2 arrows to add 2 integers on a number line. The first arrow started at 0 and ended at the first number of the sum. So what they're saying is, and get an arrow here, and they're saying, so like if this was 3 plus -9, they were using 1 arrow to get to 3, right, to get you all the way to 3, and then the second number was to go back. So on this one here, it would have, using that method for the -5, you would have started at 0, gone back to the -5, drawn an arrow to there, and then move the 3 units to the right. However, this way here, they're just saying, instead of using that first arrow from 0, we'll simply just find the first add-in. We call these 2 numbers being added to each other. The numbers being added together are the add-ins, and the result is what we call a sum, S-U-M. So they're saying instead of using 2 lines, just start at the location of the first number, like +3 or -5, and then move right or left depending upon if it's a positive or a negative number. So let's do some examples there and give that a try. So I'm going to put in, we need to start with negative 11. So we'll say that negative 11 is down here. We'll call that there. And we're adding a positive number, so we're going to move to the right, correct? So we would go right 6 spaces. Now, if 0 were down here, and we were to move 6 spaces going to the right because we're adding a positive number, well, 6 is less than 11, or the absolute value of 6 is less than the absolute value of 11. That means that negative 11 is too far away from 0 for 6 units to get there. So instead, it would end up here at negative 5. And I'm not going to mark all those units in there, but it'd be 6 units would get us to negative 5. So we'd still end up with a negative number. And there is a shortcut to this. Some of you are probably thinking about that. And we'll talk about that on an upcoming slide here in a moment. So for the next one, I'm at negative 1. And yes, I'm looking up here, kind of thinking what the answer is going to be to decide where to put it on the number line. 0 being here. And so I'm starting at negative 1, and I'm adding a negative number, so that means I'm going back to the left. So I'm going to go back to the left 8 more spaces, and that would land me down here at negative 9. The distance from negative 1 to negative 9 is 8 spaces. And then finally, I am, let's do 10. We'll start at the first number. 0 is back here someplace. And I'm adding a negative number, so that means I'm going to go back to the left 5 spaces. So if I go back to the left, well, the absolute value of 5 is less than the absolute value of 10. So it's not going to be enough to get us to 0. So we know the answer is going to be in the positive section someplace. And if we have 10 minus 5 is indeed positive 5, correct? So let's look at our next slide. Absolute values. And so you might have heard me using the term absolute value in my description. That's because I knew I was leading up to this concept. And that concept is this. You can use absolute values to find the sum of 2 or more integers. So adding integers in words, we're going to say if they have the same sign, such as 8 and 12 are both positive. So these are positive numbers. They have the same sign. And negative 6 and negative 4, they have the same sign. So that would apply to this situation. Add the absolute values and use the common sign. So absolute value of 8 is 8, and the absolute value of 12 is 12, and 8 plus 12 is 20. For the second problem here, the absolute value of negative 6 is 6, and the absolute value of negative 4 is 4, and 6 plus 4 is 10, and they both are negative. So we would use a negative sign. And that makes sense because two numbers that are positive, if you put those together, it's just going to get more positive, right? A greater value that's positive. And if you have two negative numbers and you're adding them together, it's just going to get more negative. So it makes sense that the sign would match up with whatever the add-ins are. So if both your add-ins are the same sign, then your answer is the same sign. Just add their absolute values together and throw the same sign on there. What if they're different signs? So subtract the lesser absolute value from the greater absolute value and use the sign of the number with the greater absolute value. So let's see how that works out. 5 and negative 8. So they're opposite signs. They're different signs. And the absolute value of 8 is 8 and the absolute value of 5 is 5. So we're going to subtract 5 from 8 and get 3. And of these two numbers, negative 8 has the greatest absolute value, so we're going to make the sign match up with it. Here we have negative 11, and we're adding 13 to it. So let's take they're different signs, so let's take their absolute values. The absolute value of 11 is 11. The absolute value of 13 is 13. So 13 minus 11 is 2. 13 has the greater absolute value, and it's positive, so our answer is going to be positive. And then finally, opposites. The sum of a number and its opposite is 0. So we've done an activity before where we learned what opposites were, such as 7 and negative 7. These are opposites of each other. And if you add opposites together, you're always going to get a 0. The answer will always be 0. Now we're going to talk about the additive inverse property, and that has to do with this whole number 3 point here about opposites, okay? So the opposite of a number is also called its additive inverse. In item 3 in the notebook can be written algebraically so that's if you're keeping a notebook, but the thing we want to look at is right here. Any number a added to its opposite is always going to equal 0. And it is called the additive inverse property. And inverses, I'll point this out, this is like a bonus, nothing on the homework about it, but the inverse property always gets us back to an identity property. So the inverse property always takes us back to an identity property. Identity, I think I got it spelled right. Math teachers don't know how to spell very well, do they? And you might be saying, so what's identity? Well, this means that anytime you add 0 to any value, you're going to get that same value back. You get its identity. It's like looking in a mirror, it sees itself. So, or you look at your ID card or a driver's license, it's your identification card. You look at it, there's a picture of you. You see yourself. So anytime that you take any number and add it to 0, you get that same number. This is called the identity property. And inverses always get us back to identity. So a plus negative a is going to get you to 0, and 0 is the identity property. So that's kind of a bonus there. I learned that in college, thought it was pretty neat. Inverses get us back to the identity. So let's look at how that works with example 2. So adding 2 integers, find the sum. Remember, sum means to add, and the numbers that we're adding together are called addends. That's ADDENDS. The numbers that are being added together are called addends, and the result is called a sum. So I'm going to do a little bit of erasing here, get all that out the way. Outstanding. So we need to find the sum of negative 54 and positive 28. So in this case, they're both the same sign, correct? So let's just add them together. Their absolute values, 54 plus 28 is 82. They both have the same sign, so we're going to make the answer match that same sign. In this case, it's negative. On B, we're going to find the sum of positive 38 and negative 17. So they are different signs. Let's see here, they're different signs. So we need to subtract the absolute value of negative 17 from the absolute value of 38, and that would be 21. And since the absolute value of 38 is greater than the absolute value of 17, we're going to make the answer have the same sign as whatever the 38 has, which is positive. So our solution is positive 21. So here we are at that scuba diver question, right? And here we have, this repeats it. I'll go ahead and read it again. This is from the first page. A scuba diver studying marine life. He's 4 feet below sea level. So we're starting at negative 4 below sea level. So that's why it's a negative 4. From that depth, the diver descends 72 feet. So they're descending. They're going down deeper. So we'll call that a negative number as well. So that's negative 72. And then rises 61 feet. So they go back up toward the surface and 61 feet. So we're going to make that a positive. Where is the diver relative to sea level? So here we'll add these together. It looks like we're taking the negative 4 and the negative 72, and we're going to add those together first. Indeed, they're saying add the negative 4 and the negative 72. They're both the same sign, so we're going to add them together to get 76. They are both negative, so we'll make the sign match. It's a negative number. Now we're going to take the negative 76 and the positive 61. They are different signs, so we're going to do some subtraction. We're going to subtract the lesser absolute value from the greater absolute value. So negative 76 has an absolute value of 76. 61 has an absolute value of 61. 76 is greater than 61. So 76 minus 61 is 15. And the negative 76 has the greatest absolute value. So we will take that negative sign and make it match our answer. So the sum is negative 15. So the diver is 15 feet below sea level. Here we see example 4 of evaluating variable expressions. So we know that evaluating means that we are going to take the number that they give us, the value of the variable. A variable is a symbol that represents a number that can change, or a value that can change. In this case, they're assigning negative 22 to x and negative 12 to y. So we're just going to substitute those values in where we see the x and the y, and then actually solve to get a final answer. That's what it means to evaluate. So on A, it's x plus negative 9, and B is x plus 17 plus y. So let's look at the first one. We start with x plus negative 9, and we're just going to plug in the negative 22 for the value of x. And that's all we've done here is we've substituted negative 22 for x. And now they are both negative numbers, so we'll add them together to get 31. And since they're both negative, the answer is going to be negative. On the next one, we're taking the x and substituting negative 22. We're taking the value of y and substituting negative 12. Kind of make it easier to stand out there. Notice how they color code them. The x is red, so the negative 22 is red, and the y is blue, so the negative 12 is blue. So it looks like we're going to go ahead and take the negative 22 and the positive 17. So they are different signs, so we know we're going to have to do some subtraction. Negative 22 has a greater absolute value than negative 17, so we're going to subtract 17 from 22 and get 5. The absolute value of negative 22 is greater than the absolute value of 17, so we're going to use the sign, negative sign, from the negative 22 for the negative 5. And then we just bring down our negative 12 here. Now we have to deal with the negative 12 and the negative 5. They are both the same sign, so we're going to add them together. 5 plus 12 is 17, and since they're both negative, our answer will be negative as well. All right, let's do a couple of the checkpoint ones. We'll do the number 7, and we'll do number 9. That sounds good. So A, we're going to substitute in A is negative 18 plus negative 8. So they are both negative, so our answer is going to be negative. And since they're both the same sign, we're going to add them together. 18 plus 8 is 26, so our solution would be negative 26. Then for number 9, I need to take the 18. I'm going to use parentheses. I always kind of like to use parentheses wherever the variable is in order to substitute that. It kind of holds that negative sign in there and makes it not so confusing. So first I need to deal with the negative 18 and the negative 3. They are the same sign, so the answer is going to be negative as well. 18 plus 3 is 21. Now bring down my plus 30. All right, and one's positive, one's negative, so I'm going to do the absolute value concept. Absolute value of negative 21 is 21. The absolute value of 30 is 30. So I'm going to do 30 minus 21 to get 9. And 30 has the greater absolute value, so whatever sign the 30 is what I'm going to use, and it's positive, so I'm going to leave my answer positive, and the answer here is 9. All right, our guided practice, we'll just kind of look over this and glance and see what we might have. It says copy and complete. To add 2 integers without using a number line, you need to use the blank of each number, and that would be the absolute value. That's referencing the absolute value concept that we used. How can you tell whether the sum of negative 71 and 43 is positive or negative without actually finding the sum? Well, they're different signs. So whatever the answer is, without even doing the math on it, we know that the answer is going to have a negative value because the negative 71 has a greater absolute value than the positive 43. Here we have use a number line to find the sum. So let's do just number 5. So if I had a number line here, and I'm going to start at 15, and I'm adding a negative number, means I'm going back to the left, and I'm going to go back 7 spaces. It's not going to be enough to get me back here to 0, is it? But it will get me to, it should be, what is that, 8? Yep, it should be 8. 8 plus 7, 15. Indeed it is. So our answer here would be 8. Here we have find the sum. We'll do the one here in the middle, number 7. We'll just kind of touch on that. So we have a negative plus a positive. So they are different signs. So we're going to have to go ahead and subtract. 15 minus 3 is 12. And 15 has the greater absolute value, so I'm going to use the same matching sign. So the answer would be negative 12. Evaluate the expression when x equals 9. Let's try number 11 right here. That works well. So for x, we're going to replace it with a negative 9. And then bring the plus negative 3. Now they are the same sign, so I know my answer is going to be negative because they're both negative. And then I need to subtract. 9 minus 3 is 6. And so my answer would be negative 6. And I'm incorrect, right? I paused a second like, Mr. T, that don't sound right. No, it's they are the same sign, so I add them together. I don't subtract them. And that's going to be 12. And then they have the same sign. So the answer is negative 12. If you were thinking that ahead of me, good job. All right. The last one we'll do here is 13. And it says describe and correct the error in using a number line to find the sum. So this means to add the sum of negative 2 and 5. So that would be negative 2 plus 5, right? So that's what sum means, is to add. So what did they do wrong? Well, they started at negative 2. Well, that's correct. But we're adding a positive number. They went to the left where they should have gone to the right. They should have gone 5 that way and would have ended up, what, over at positive 3, correct? So that's everything I have for lesson 1.5, titled Adding Integers, where we learn to not only subtract, but we learn to add and subtract. Actually, we learn to add negative integers, if anything more so. All right, so hopefully this helps you out with your IXL activities. Good luck.